Hello and welcome to this Tortoise ThinkIn on monetizing the sisterhood. It's a meaty subject. Today we're going to be talking about whether toxic cultures thrive in feminist companies and what even is a feminist company anyway. Does such a thing really exist? My name is Basia. I'm one of the editors at Tortoise, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all because it's something that I've been really keen to think about and investigate for quite a long time. In part, we're having this conversation now because of what we've seen happening with the wing, which sort of rise and what looks like the fall of this really, loved and lauded women's co-working space that secured nearly 200 million in VC funding, was marketed as this haven of intersectional feminism, and now has been at the centre of allegations of sort of systematic mistreatment of Black and brown employees, which has led to the resignation of its star founder, Audrey Gelman. While that's our kind of starting point, I hope that this conversation will be bigger and broader than just the wing. But before we get into it, I'll just run you all through how this works. If this is your first Tortoise ThinkIn, really the idea is that we hear as little from me as possible and as from as many of you as we can. We've got 1 hour. There are two ways that you can get involved. You can either participate in the chat on the right hand side of your screen, where my colleague Claudia will be encouraging you all to share your ideas. There she is, encouraging you all to share your ideas and thoughts and criticisms and tips and your own experiences. And you can also raise your digital hand by clicking on the participants button. And I'll try and come to as many of you as I can. But we also have three amazing writers who are joining us today, who have written on some of the issues that I think the wing really gets us to think about. The first joining us is Yomi Adegike, who is the co-author of Slay in Your Lane, which still for me is the best book title of the last, well, forever. It's brilliant, and the book itself is amazing, and I would encourage you all to read it. We're also joined by Jessa Crispin, who's the author of the brilliant manifesto, Why I'm Not a Feminist, and Ilana Kaplan, who has written about the rise of corporate feminism and is a contributor to the New York Times, New York Magazine, Vogue, and many others, and has also written about Refinery 29. Just before we get started, I also really wanted to just encourage you all, if you've had experiences of going to the wing or working in sort of feminist companies, or you have some personal experience, I would really encourage you to share if you feel comfortable. But also, I think a part of this conversation is about how to raise capital. And so if you have experience as a woman trying to raise money, I think that's also a part of this that we should get into. But first, Ilana, if you don't mind, I'll come to you first. You wrote a piece last year about the rise of corporate feminism, and I thought we could just start there with the basics. What is, in your view, corporate feminism? How do we define it? What is it?
I mean, corporate feminism to me is any kind of business that tries to capitalize on the feminist movement and monetize it in such a way that it isn't really genuinely supporting feminism. It's clearly rooted in capitalism.
And you've written that we've seen a rise of this, particularly post-Trump. And arguably post Me Too as well. Why do you think there's been such a rise in companies that are marketing themselves along feminist principles?
I think, because events like the Women's March and Me Too have gotten a lot of people to speak up more, and we've seen people speak up on social media, and we've seen celebrities speak up across the board. It's kind of been a way for companies to jump on a bandwagon and do so. It's an opportunity for them to make money because they see there's this interest or this like spark in interest. So a lot of times it's like surface level, and it's a way to just, print a T-shirt and put "I'm a feminist" on it, and suddenly it's kind of like virtue signaling for the person who buys it, and the companies can make a ton of money off of it.
I have to say I was quite struck. I think it was in your piece you said you did a kind of itinerary of the things that the wing had been selling, these like trinkets, like a keychain that said "Girls doing whatever the f they want in 2019." In Sisters We Trust socks that cost $15. You know, the Joy of Sisterhood tote for $30. I mean, it is almost too obvious, but if we look at the wing in particular, and part of the reason that the wing has generated so much attention, and this is something that Linda Kintzler has written about quite extensively in The Guardian, I wonder your thoughts on this, is that while the wing was kind of steeped in feminist language of emancipation and empowerment and equality, it's essentially a business that's based on like one of the most elitist institutions, which is the private members club. And so it always had this paradox at the heart of it. How do you think that's played out?
I mean, I think I'll be transparent. Like, I have moderated events for them, but I've been to the wing. I also interviewed Audrey. I think that at the end of the day, it's business. It's not, there are a lot of issues with the business, and it's elitist. It's catered to wealthy white women. I mean, it's not cheap to join. I remember when I interviewed Audrey and asked what she was going to do for the Black community and people of color, like if there were any other initiatives aside from scholarships that they were going to really try and make the wing a more inclusive space. She basically said they were going to expand to their scholarship program. And to me, that just wasn't enough. And what does that mean? You know, like there's only so many spots, and like it didn't seem like enough. And I think it was on purpose that it's been on purpose that the business is catered towards wealthy white women. That's just how I've seen it. I've been to an event there. It's a nice space, but it's private. It's like it's a way to make you feel like a little bit elitist.
If we just draw on the idea of corporate feminism, Jessa, I wonder if I can come to you. Your manifesto, I have to say, really sort of shook me and shook how I thought about feminism. There's a line in your introduction that I would love you to expand on, where you wrote, somewhere along the way towards female liberation, it was decided that the most effective method for feminism was for it to become universal, but that feminism itself would have to be rebranded and remarketed. And I wonder if you could talk through that rebranding exercise, and is that sort of what underpins the moment that we find ourselves in now, where we see, you know, it's bigger than just the wing. This has happened at Refinery 29, Outdoor Voices, and many others. So if you could just talk about that rebranding.
Well, the way that liberation is now understood in our culture is that you liberate yourself through financial power, right? You make enough money so that you are no longer oppressed by discrimination. Essentially, you make enough money that people are forced to respect you. And I mean, there was just a new sort of commercial about that, sort of trying to capitalize on the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think is now the new thing that's going to be co-opted by marketing departments all over the world. But essentially, that is an easier way to go about it. Certainly, it's a much more selfish. You don't have to actually care about anybody else if you just focus on your own liberation. And then because you use the feminist label, you can sort of posit yourself as a big success story, as some sort of heroic figure. And who doesn't love feeling heroic? So yeah, it's just part of this larger system of you manage your freedom and you manage your sense of empowerment through how much money you make every year, and that's it.
You've described your feminism as a cleansing fire, which I thought was an amazing image. that it can't be incremental. And I think the sort of a generous interpretation of the wing, particularly as it has been more recently, is that it was doing the best of what we can do within a capitalist patriarchal system, that it was, you know, creating a space for women, and it should have been celebrated for that. But I think that you don't believe that those increments work, and that you know, I wonder how you conceptualize then whether a feminist company can exist.
I mean, if the wing is the best that we can do, I mean, what did it do? What did it do? It made rich women richer. It made women who were already on the path to sort of, you know, coming out of elite universities, coming out of these exclusive networks, it allowed them to accumulate more power and more wealth. That's it. Like, that was its entire intention, and that's what it accomplished. So, you know, that's, I can't imagine any definition of feminism that sort of falls into. I think that clearly we have a difficulty in understanding that what is good for a singular woman does not necessarily make it good for womankind. I think that we are often very blinded by this idea of women as a collective, because we're not. We don't all want one thing, nor should we. And what's best for one is going to be oppressive to another. And this is why I think that feminism in this particular moment is very misguided and almost sort of intellectually bankrupt, because we're clearly seeing spike in domestic violence cases, mass unemployment, mass eviction crisis. And the only thing that feminists can do is like, well, maybe if we have like a female vice president, ... Like, there's no end to that sentence. It's just sort of like, you know, maybe things will somehow miraculously become better.
That point about value, about just, you know, that we measure value by wealth and power. I wonder how do we generate value for feminism in the present moment that doesn't just replicate, you know, the company structure, or that, you know, that we don't just have more female CEOs, and that we don't measure the value by, oh, there's more women in Fortune 500 companies or in the FTSE. Like, how do we create a sense of value for this moment that isn't, as you say, intellectually bankrupt?
Right. Well, I specifically individually value people not living on the street. I value children not going hungry. I mean, you know, like, I don't understand why these are so, you know, we sort of push this off to nonprofit world, which is its own nightmare. And the feminist community as a whole doesn't even talk about these issues, except for in a very sort of shallow way. Nobody's sort of talking about how this mass crisis of domestic violence should have us rethinking romantic relationships, should have us rethinking housing, should have us rethinking everything. So to me, it's just our entire value system has been warped, and I think also sort of maintained by a media culture that is, you know, I think the reason why the wing was celebrated at its beginning rather than sort of shown to be a fraud is because its coverage was mostly done by its target demographic, which is urban, white, pretty, young ladies in New York City. Like, you know, if anybody would talk to somebody who's excluded by these systems, right, they can sort of see things that are a con job.
I wonder if we could come to Emmanuel Andrews, who's just in the chat mentioned that she's an employee of the wing in London. If you're happy to talk, Emmanuel, it would be great to hear from you.
Hi, my name's not actually Emmanuel, it's Natalie. I'm borrowing my friend's account at the moment. Thank you so much for holding this space. I'm still dubious about how much I can really say at this point, because we are currently in deep negotiation. Well, we're not being negotiated, like there's no negotiations, we're just being told. But just for some context about the wing, members and how they engage with members is one part of it, but how they treated their staff, which I can speak directly to from experience, was racist. And sometimes I find like there is so much discussion about the concept of intersectional feminism, but a lot of the evidence of how intersectional feminism played out was how we got treated. And I'm speaking as somebody who has privilege as a light-skinned person and mixed race, but I can tell you for facts that there are 3 Black women who were managers and were working as managers and never got a proper contract. They've been asking since November. And actually last year, we were not paid for 7 weeks on minimum wage. And the excuses that we kept giving is we're just trying this out in London and we're gonna get there. Like, I can't tell you the amount of gaslighting that went on, particularly to Black and brown women, that this was just an experiment and we have to make room for people to make mistakes. And part of that was also understanding like how we fit into an American company, because if we looked at ethnicity forms, for example, Black British wasn't even on the ethnicity form. Mixed race, or like how we define mixed race heritage in the UK, it was not on the ethnicity form, and we all made a formal complaint to ask why we're being given this form that doesn't even have on it, like us on it. That's erasure. And we got told like, oh, we're so sorry about that. We're working on it. And it just kind of seemed like this excuse was going on and on until we're at this point now where they've completely disintegrated. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, we all were on the call when Audrey left. I'm pretty sure that was a response to knowing what was about to come out after the BLM movement. So as much as I want to engage in the discussion around feminism itself, I think there's a much more important issue that's kind of underlying, which is around racism, and how Black and brown women are erased and silenced by these large organizations that dominate the conversation, that dominate how things are done. And I just wanted to share that, and also to get it out, because we aren't under NDA. We're going to be asked to sign an NDA, and they paid us furlough and are asking us to accept that 2 months furlough is our severance. And we're still frantically trying to organize. We don't have money for lawyers. They have a lot. And we're currently trying to crowdfund so that we can get lawyers, so that we can try and get a little bit more particularly for the 3 Black women who are doing double jobs, and they're going to be pushed off with no money. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I just have one more question for you, which is, I was talking to somebody who wanted to remain anonymous at the end of last week in preparation for this conversation, and she used to work at another women's membership organization, and she said that part of the thing that really struck her was that she went into this company buying into the mission that this was about female empowerment, and so she took on a lot more than she would have done in a different kind of company, because she believed in that mission, and she ultimately felt like she was exploited because the sort of the mantra that was constantly being told to the employees is, well, just, we're actually working for a higher purpose here, and all the mistreatment was packaged in this way. And I wonder, do you recognize that? Is that something that you would say?
100%. I mean, it got to the point where we were describing it, like, particularly the movie, as like, again, apologies if this is sensitive for anyone. I always feel still this like part of holding back, but we felt like it was white feminism Disneyland. It was like, come and be your girl boss, and we will charge you £16 for a keyring, whilst we're not even getting £16 an hour for serving you. It was definitely that. I think that what actually happened was Black women and brown women began to resist that culture first, because we recognize it. especially when you're really not showing up in our bank accounts. It's really not acceptable to not pay people for 7 weeks with no money. But what we realized was that it took a lot more of a toll on us than it did for some people who could live without 7 weeks pay. We had two Black women have to leave because of mental health breakdown in the kitchen because they got paid £30 in the space of 7 weeks with 2 children to feed. And you know, we couldn't say anything, or we felt like whenever we tried to say something, there was a gang, literally a gang of white women who still believed in the cause and would be like, yeah, but if you make a noise about this, then you're going to stop women coming to the wing. And that was definitely what was pushed on us. It was like, if you say something, you're going to ruin it for all women. That was definitely what felt like was happening. So that is why, I mean, I've shared it with one of my friends who is a member, what was going on, because I actually had to borrow money to pay my rent. And she was like horrified by what happened and withdrew her membership. But there was such strict rules on us. It only got to the point where we were all about to walk out, that somebody flew over from New York to pacify us and basically say, we're so sorry, here's some like £50, literally they gave us £50 to say, here's for your travel, so you can still keep coming to work, but you have to still keep coming to work. And I will never forget the horrendous like damage that did to people's mental health before Christmas, having no money. What they're doing now is they told us to take Christmas off, and they paid for lots and lots of alcohol, which doesn't really help those of us that don't drink too much, to say sorry. And then now, as we're trying to negotiate for our redundancy, they've taken that Christmas period that they gave us off, which was 2 weeks, out of our annual leave allowance, so that we're now not going to get paid that money, and 80% of what our salary is for 2 months. And we've kind of brought it back to them, like, remember that time you didn't pay us for 7 weeks? It's not really acceptable that you also take our annual leave away from us and basically leave us with nothing. And their response was very much like, you should be lucky that your government has done this. In the US, we couldn't give anybody anything. But we have found out that there is a white manager that was hired. And I have to say race because I just really feel like it's relevant. She was hired just before lockdown to be area manager, which meant that she was going to open several wings across Europe. This was their first venture. she was paid £90,000 a year as an annual salary, and she's been working all through lockdown. I don't know what she was doing with no space and no members and no staff, but apparently she was very busy for all of lockdown. And now we've all been told that that's ending. She's got a payout of 2 months' salary, which is a lot of money that none of us are actually going to see at all. And I think that you're right. People felt like if you say something, you're somehow stopping feminism everywhere. You know, like if you speak up, you're working against the mission. But I think that this is something that comes from capitalization of feminism in general. Like if you are trying to sell feminism, it's only going to serve a certain women. It's not going to serve everybody. And there was just so many things that were really difficult to physically do, like sell coffee that was we're supposed to celebrate because it's an all-female brand and they only employ female farmers in different countries. And like, you know, on like package, that seems really, really great. But it was really hard to sell that coffee, knowing that you're selling it for a price that is so much higher than you're actually being paid to be there as a woman of color. It can really mess with your head. And even now, as it's all disintegrating, mental health is like all over the place. And this Flew the Coop Instagram that was in America, they've tried to reach out to us several times and asked London staff to speak on it. But there is this issue where I think we feel like there is a different culture in the UK, and it's not quite translatable. And we're still trying to work out how we advocate for the Black women that didn't get what they were owed in a language that they understand. Yeah. sorry for that massive overshare.
That was brilliant. No, thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's just really valuable to understand what it's actually been like to be inside the wing in London. Yomi, can I come to you, because I think what you were just saying, Natalie, about that they presented an inclusive vision for their feminism and an intersectional one, and I don't think you can talk about the rise of the wing or Refinery 29 or Reformation or Man Repeller or Outdoor Voices, all of these companies that have faced some kind of reckoning in the last few weeks post Black Lives Matter, without talking about the way that they use social media to build their idea of an inclusive feminism. And Yomi, a few weeks ago, you wrote a piece about optical allyship and kind of how people were presenting their politics around the Black Lives Matter movement. You wrote that for Vogue. And I wonder, what do you think about the way that feminist companies present themselves and their intersectionality versus what we're now seeing, which is Black workers speaking out and saying, this is not the reality, this is not how we're treated?
I mean, I think I firstly want to say thank you so much, Natalie, because just everything that she said is just completely spot on, like completely spot on. If you are selling feminism, then just by virtue of it being sold, only a few people are going to be able to buy it. I think that the commercialization, commodification, and mainstreamification, if that's even a word, of feminism and of activism is probably one of the biggest crises of our time in terms of actually being able to truly sort of move forward in a progressive way. I feel like platforms like The Wing, like the several different companies that you just named, Basia, essentially, how do I even put it? I feel that none of them actually engage with any of the terminology that they use. Feminism is essentially just a word. Intersectionality is absolutely devoid of meaning. If they actually had to apply any of the sort of ideologies that they were pretending to engage with, then they wouldn't even exist as companies. I feel like, in my mind, again, trying to be completely transparent, I'm somebody that's, attended The Wing, gone to events with them, but, a feminist private members club, in my mind, is almost oxymoronic by nature. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting as well that this has so sort of heavily fallen on The Wing. And I think that is because they've used the word feminist to describe their principles, their ethos, and what their brand's about. Because, I have been to other feminist or female-led private members clubs who won't necessarily describe themselves as that way. They're probably slightly, probably been a little bit more clever in terms of trying to avoid accountability, but they are, definitely women first or female-led. Mm-hmm. I've been racially profiled at, female-led private members clubs that, have offered me free membership, but have still sort of ended up racially profiling me. I have worked for feminist publications that have had us, without irony, write endless articles and listicles about the gender pay gap whilst exercising a ethnic minority pay gap. I think essentially we talk a lot about, the new buzzword is buzzwords. We talk a lot about everything being a buzzword, but I feel that feminist, anti-racist, ally, intersectional, they mean absolutely nothing. I think, it usually starts with a group of, it'd be difficult for me to say that people aren't necessarily well-meaning often. And I feel like with a lot of social media discourse, it's, definitely well-meaning. It's democratized how we're able to access information. I certainly wouldn't know a lot of things about a lot of things if it hadn't been for social media. But I do feel that the kind of compression of, really sort of serious and, thorough theory into a couple of characters and pithy kind of illustrations that are then very easily commodified for brands and regurgitated without anybody actually engaging with what these things mean in reality, has just led us to a point where, quite recently, actually, me and a friend that's actually watching this ThinkIn sort of had a massive kind of run-in on Twitter for basically suggesting that activism wasn't something that should be monetized, and that activism by its very nature isn't something that you're necessarily remunerated for or compensated for in a traditional sense. Like, yes, activists need the money to be able to continue their work, but sort of being an activist and conflating your activism with, say, like brand partnerships, because let's say that you're I don't know, like an influencer that happens to be a person of color, and happens to, you know, be a marginalized person by virtue of identity, then sort of conflating your visibility and that representation that you provide with activism, to me, is just, for lack of a better phrase, cancerous. Like, I know that sounds really strong, but it's disgusting. Like, it's something that I have seen. I mean, we're in an age where people argue that Theresa May is a feminist because she's a woman, and I think again, it's that lack of engagement with what these words mean. Feminism, and to be honest, I've been guilty of it. I definitely, you know, before I actually engaged with what anything meant, definitely thought by virtue of like being Black from a working class background, and a woman, I'm inherently intersectional. Inherently, I must, you know, be moving through the world in this intersectional way, when in reality, if I'm just regurgitating certain power structures that keep women like me, you know, oppressed essentially, then yeah, by virtue of my identity, I'm not any different. Sorry, that was again quite rant, but yeah.
No, it was brilliant. And there's a line in your book, Yomi, that stuck with me. You said that while white women fear a glass ceiling, Black women fear a glass house, or you also used the term a concrete ceiling. And I thought, when I was reading about the wing and reading about the allegations from lots of Black workers that they had been mistreated, that the members who had misbehaved or had been abusing them were prioritized over the experiences that they had had, I thought that it perfectly illustrates that idea that they tried to build this inclusive space, and yet they replicated exactly the same problems that they said that they were trying to escape from, which is that they weren't bringing everyone in. And I wondered, did you think that when you were reading about what was happening with the wing, were you basically not surprised?
I mean, again, it's quite difficult. I mean, to be honest, when you kind of are, you know, it's interesting when you kind of get the opportunity to look at things objectively, because when you are being invited into this space as a chosen one, and you know, it's easier to drink the Kool-Aid. Like, that's the, you know, the honesty of it. And I think as well, it's really important as well that we acknowledge like class is a very, very important distinction, because at the end of the day, I'm a Black woman who has been, you know, in various feminist settings, marginalized or kind of sidelined because of that. But I'm also a Black woman that has a platform, that's a columnist, that has moved throughout and upwards through whatever this like sort of ladder is. That means that the treatment, and I think that's something that gets lost as well in this conversation that we have in terms of sort of identity, and that commodification, because it's very easy to kind of swap out the word Black for, you know, working class, when in reality that's not always the case. I'm from a working class background, but I couldn't stand here and pretend that, like, at the same time, whilst, you know, Natalie so, you know, passionately spoke about the mistreatment that so many Black women were experiencing at the wing, there were several Black women that were then being invited in to, like, you know, go on luncheons and be members for free and do all these brilliant events. And I think that's something that I've had to be reckoning with personally as this has all unfolded, because I think it can happen, and that's why intersectionality as a concept matters so much, but genuinely has to mean something, because it's very easy when we kind of, you know, what's the word, kind of reduce intersectionality to just being about there are white women and there are Black women, because then it's very easy for middle-class Black women or middle-class minority women to be paraded as examples of why this is an intersectional institution, when in reality there are going to be very unlikely to be no working class white women or Black women or Asian women or working class women of any other description. Disability, like how accessible is it in terms of disability? Yeah, I think with the wing, it's like, I think, as I kind of mentioned, that I have been to another women-led or whatever private member club, and I do think that whilst I wasn't necessarily surprised, that was more because the wing opted into defining itself as feminist and very heavily, and you know, really branding itself in that way and really sort of pushing that narrative, whereas other institutions that are near identical aren't necessarily held to the exact same standards because they have just been a bit trixier maybe in terms of how heavily they've lent on brand feminism. They're still doing the exact same thing, and I'd honestly say they're still leaning on feminism in the exact same way. They just have probably preempted that if you're gonna define yourself as an intersectional feminist, then you know it's gonna be a lot easier to kind of notice when you're not adhering to that at all, compared to when you sort of do that vague, nebulous, like girl power bracket.
Yeah, I'd really like to return to that idea of the standards that we hold these companies to, because I'm also keen to sort of, I guess, just keep in mind that there are lots of terrible companies that are run by men. But I think that the point that you make about, the standards that we hold them to is really good. I'd like to bring in, and I hope I'm going to say your name right, Otega Uwagba, who has made some comments in the chat and is also a wing member. Hello.
Hi. I was just kind of, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I was just kind of observing and just kind of agreeing with everything that everyone has said. Again, Natalie, thank you for sharing those experiences, because personally, as a former member, I wasn't aware of what was going on, mostly because I didn't use the membership and really go in. So I was invited to be a founding member of the London space last year. And I'll be honest, before I'd been invited, I had privately expressed a lot of misgivings about the wing to friends. And I think for all the reasons that, you know, people have shared, but more in a kind of theoretical way. I was like, what kind of feminist does this make me? Is this the kind of feminist I want to be endorsing? But I didn't have really, there were no stories at that time about kind of employee mistreatment or racism, that kind of thing. And I felt like, I mean, for me, I really wanted to be a part of a women-only space. I know someone of you in the chat earlier was like, why would you want to be a part of a women-only club? To me, that's just really appealing. And that it really fits in with the kind of work I do and how I like to spend my time. And so I kind of happily took that in. I think it became clear to me quite early on from when it opened that, you know, one of the conversations I had with one of the kind of, before it opened with like one of the kind of senior people was, I kind of saw myself kind of joining this like steering committee where I could like host events that were, you know, free, you know, I felt like I could maybe try and use my influence to kind of like push them in a slightly more inclusive direction, which very quickly became clear wasn't the case. But I think something that was said earlier, I think by Jessa, and Jessa, I've, you know, read your work and read your book and really appreciate it, about it not necessarily being beneficial to anyone apart from a limited set of women. I think part of the reason the wing was so successful with their marketing is that they were really clever at making, you know, they had like, I think members had to do like a certain number of charitable days. They worked with a lot of charitable organizations. I've been introduced to charitable organizations they platformed on their, you know, on their social media. And I think as a result, it was quite easy to kind of, I definitely feel like I drank the Kool-Aid to an extent. I think for me, I actually terminated, if one can terminate a complimentary membership back in March, because there was an article in the New York Times. So it was kind of before this latest round of kerfuffle, but there was an article in the New York Times, which personally I actually thought was a little bit thinly reported in terms of what, you know, was wrong with the wing. But there was something in there that really got to me, which was one of the staff members who was Black and non-binary, so they'd felt really tokenized. And I felt like my presence was, I felt like I was being tokenized or like wheeled out on social media, and I'd get like emails forwarded to me by friends who were considering joining it and being like, oh, your name is listed as one of the founding members. And I felt like, because their values didn't seem to be living up to what I'd kind of felt like it might be, it just felt at that point like I wanted to distance myself from it. But I just kind of wanted to give my perspective as someone who was very much invited into the fold. who didn't have to, like, I think it's really important to disclose that I wasn't paying for a membership, because I think that completely changes how you feel about it. I was kind of, it's weird, I was kind of critical of them before, critical during, critical afterwards. I'm not entirely sure how I managed to slip into the net, but I just wanted to share, I just kind of wanted to share that perspective, essentially, because I think, and I feel like I wanted to be openly critical of them, because I think sometimes it's easy to say, oh, well, so-and-so is just jealous because they weren't invited, or blah, blah. You know, I think that is something, and I think it's really important that the people who were invited into the fold also hold them accountable, hold themselves accountable, hold the wing accountable, and talk quite honestly about that experience. So yeah, I just wanted to chip in on that.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question? You just made me think about the point about accountability. I mean, can we hold these sort of CEOs, these girl bosses or SHEOs, or whatever the trendy hashtag term for them is, can we hold them accountable if they just resign the moment they're called out?
No,
because
that's exactly the point. They've just, it's like, what's that phrase? The glass cliff, when when men fuck up and a female CEO is brought in to kind of clean up the mess. And I've always kind of heard that discussed in kind of like men, women binary, but I think it can definitely apply in a lot of situations. But Audrey Gellman has bounced. She still has stock. She still has stock that is probably worth, I think I did a quick calculation based on how much the company is projected to be worth and how much stock she owns, 10% of the company. She is still a multi-millionaire as a result of what happened with the wing. And she's actually just taken a step back and been like, to me, that's kind of the perfect scam. Like, ride the wave whilst the going is good, whilst you're getting the positive press and feedback and you being invited to post for Chanel and all of that. The second the going gets tough, you bounce and then rebrand yourself. Maybe in a couple of years, maybe you do like an apology tour. She's not having, and it's also, she's not apologizing. That's the thing that I really noticed with, I guess, statements she released when she resigned, and I think she gave an interview to the New York Times. Like, I've followed it really closely. She hasn't apologized. She really hasn't admitted culpability. And I don't know if that will ever happen. And also just to hear, I think for me, what really changed the game was going from hearing the kind of more theoretical debates about whether the ring was right or not, to hearing the kind of the stories of like the actual malpractice and the bad workplace culture and the racism that was going on. That for me is what really changed the game, and was like the fact that she oversaw that and fostered that and has just stepped away from it is just so shocking. So no, I don't think there's accountability. But I don't know, who knows whether that will change in future.
Thanks, Atega. Can we come back to Natalie, because I think you would like to just make another point, and we'd love to hear from you again, specifically around the race question. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I hope this isn't taking up too much space, but just directly on what you said, Atega, thank you so much for, you're always like a person that we saw and would feel like we're really happy to have in the space. But I just want to give for context, so you're aware of what accountability measures we've been asking for. So when Black Lives Matter began to trend, we saw that the wing put out a very public statement saying that they support Black Lives Matter and donated, somebody told me it was £200,000 to Black Lives Matter in America. And this is after we had already written a collective email, and it wasn't just Black and brown members of staff, it was all of the minimum wage staff, wrote a letter asking for some changes. I mean, this was the first time that the Black and brown women who worked on minimum wage had then, like the rest of the other white staff that wanted to help us, which was great. So we mobilized and we wrote this letter, and at some point I'll be happy to release it to anybody, but we made several things, including that the Black women that we work with get the contracts that they've been asking for from November. And we also wanted them to acknowledge our Black members of staff, even say one word, how are you? Like, it was literally like we were just dead to them. And there was people that were dealing with a lot of mental health stuff of which they knew about, and it didn't, like, at no point did they want to reach out and say, are you okay? I think that really hurt a lot of us. One of the managers who is more senior than us, she's mixed race, identifies as Black, she wrote them an email and said, look, you've had this collective email from all of your staff. I'm asking you, please check on them, because they need you to acknowledge that they even exist. She got an email bounce back from the new manager that was being paid a lot of money to do, I'm not sure what. We are inherently anti-racist, so it is not our place to comment on anything. And that was it. And it was silence. And it, like, I can't tell you how damaging. It's not, we're not asking you to give us £200,000. We should, but, like, to say, how are you? Like, I don't get it. It really, really blows my mind that even that was too much of a stretch. The other thing that we found out with regards to, so we started to make these anti-racist demands with the help of all of our colleagues. And so we got silence, we got nothing. But when we were calculating, okay, how are we going to ask for 2 months severance, which is what the US got, they said, sorry, that's too much money, we can't pay that. So what we decided to do is say, well, why don't we take the managers out of it and just ask for the lower income staff? And the reason we did that is because most of those managers are white. There's only 2 Black women. And we asked them, would you be cool if we took you out of the equation? When we asked them that, we realized that one of the Black women who ran the kitchen and ran everything in the wing that kept it going also didn't have a contract and was being paid the same amount as hourly space staff. So other managers are being paid £90,000 on a salary and a contract. And only when we asked this question did we realize that the kitchen manager is on the same wage as us. She didn't even know that. And there was somebody else who was a white woman who was helping with events, working less hours, and she had a contract, she had a salary, and it was much higher than everybody else's. So the rage that we felt was like, if you are going to say one single word about Black Lives Matter, please check on your Black staff first, because there is a lot of stuff that has been left unresolved. The other thing I wanted to notice on that is that there are several grievances that are being undertaken at the wing at present in London about racism, explicitly about racism and how racism has played out in the staff community in London that have been left unresolved. So that no accountability has been taken. There is still a current case. I know of 2. I know someone else that knows of 4 cases of racism from managers to lower staff who raised a complaint with the US and have said, we'll get back to you. And it's been left wide open. So people are expected to work with each other, and these grievances of racial discrimination have been left open. So there are, to take accountability isn't even necessarily just a public facing thing. There are people waiting for answers that you're airing on email, but you're so quick to come back and tell us how we're not going to get the money that we're owed. We were also, like, I could go on, sorry.
I can see lots of people nodding and kind of, you know, agreeing and keen to hear from you. Thank you, Nasi. It's really, really useful to have.
Say this, I've got this like nerve that something really bad is going to happen because of this, but I think that's just gaslighting that does it too. So it needs to come out.
Thank you. I want to bring in a couple more people because we are remarkably quickly running out of time, but I just wanted to return to Jessa quickly before I do. I wanted to ask you, there's a bit in your book, and again I urge everyone to read this, well, it's not a book, it's a manifesto really, which is about outrage and about how we deal with, I suppose it relates to the question of accountability. And, you know, there have been lots of women in, you know, the last 20 years who have been known to behave poorly, who are senior in their organisations, Anna Wintour, Arianna Huffington. They haven't had to resign in the way that this particular cohort of female CEOs or editors have had to. And I wonder what's changed. Why, in your mind, why are we responding like this in this particular moment?
Well, I would argue that nothing really has changed. That these women are still profiting off of the stock that they have for their companies, as was pointed out. Is just, so I don't know that that things have improved. I think that companies in moments of panic and in self-preservation now see a quick firing as a way to quell controversy. And you see it, I mean, it's been happening all over, from the New York Times to the Wing to other organizations in many different industries. It's just, once a sort of accusation happens, there's no loyalty. It's just like, well, get rid of them, and then we can change the conversation. It's just about profit. It's about nothing more. So I think that when we have this idea that, oh, it's progress that this person was fired, it's progress that somebody else will be leading this elitist institution, I think it's very smoke and mirrors. The elitist institution still exists. The New York Times still exists and is still putting out garbage every single day. So I don't think that we can actually point to any of these things as actual success.
Thank you. I wondered if I could come to, because the Wing, as I said earlier, is like a perfect sort of example, and it pulls in so many of the questions that I think we all need to grapple with, but it's not limited to the Wing, and there are many other organizations out there that feel problematic. And I saw earlier my colleague Liz talking about another organization, and I wonder, Liz, if you'd be happy to share your thoughts, because I know this whole topic is something that you've also given a lot of thought to, if you're there. Have we got Liz? No, Liz. Okay. In which case, Yasmin, you were also a member of the Wing. We'll come back to the Wing. If you are there and would be happy to come on camera. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, look, I don't really know if I can add more. Natalie's a friend of mine, and I thought it was really important to bring someone who had, experience to be able to kind of share, to share. I think, as Ataya kind of mentioned, so I was also somebody that was invited as a founding member and had all sorts of questions. I think for me, as somebody who lives quite publicly in a lot of ways, my integrity is one of the few things that that I have control over. And so there was a question around my integrity when it came to joining something like the Wing. But I was like, okay, I'm new to London. I don't really have many networks. Joining a club like this is a way for me to connect to folks, because I'm a freelancer. How am I going to make friends? So I thought this would be a way for me to do so. And when I joined early on, I had a number of conversations with people around within the organization who came over from the US and said, how do we make things more inclusive? I do this sort of work for companies and organizations, and I was like, look, here are some very specific ways you can go about it. And they did none of those things. And then when I heard from Natalie very early on that people weren't being paid, I was like, this is completely unacceptable. I cannot abide, and I was paying, and it was a lot of money, and I didn't really know if I could afford it, but I was like, maybe the connections that I'll be able to make, maybe the friends that I'll be able to make. I'm not somebody that comes from a background with a safety net, but I was taking that risk. I saw it as an investment, and very quickly I realized that it wasn't an investment that I thought I should continue. They were not interested in letting me end my membership until I said, it was funny because I was emailing one of the folks over in the US, and I was like, well, it turns out you guys don't pay your employees, so I would rather not be part of an organization that does that. And they were like, oh yes, okay, no worries, your membership is cancelled. So like they knew, and I was just really disappointed. I was really disappointed because, yes, I know all the systems are screwed. Like, I know that I'm like a Black Muslim woman. I know that the system's not built for me, but, sometimes you're like, I want nice things. But then you find out that those nice things are very Wizard of Ozzy. And it's disappointing and it's sad. But hopefully, with it, you know, I mean, we have to hope that things will change. We have to hope that folks can, and perhaps, I think perhaps the lesson for me is that the answers are not in paying for private memberships that claim to be something they're not. I think if they were a membership club that said, hey, you know, we're a very profit-driven business, we're going to give you nice perfumes, but really this is just a nice space in the city, that would have been much more honest. But the fact that they tried to sell values that they clearly didn't care about, that for me was the rub. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I guess now I put my energy into networks and organizations that I, you know, that I have always known, ones that I don't have to pay for, ones that are about values, and ones that there is, that where everyone is equitable and there's no hierarchy, because I think that's really important.
Thank you, Yasmin. Can we come back to Yomi, who has something to say about the standards that we're holding these women to, and about that point about accountability?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, it would be ludicrous to suggest that women aren't held to a higher standard than men, whether it be in business, whether it be in absolutely anything. But I do think that it's super important that we don't ignore the fact that these sort of tags of feminist, activist, intersectional, these are what companies such as The Wing and these other feminist, purportedly feminist companies have labeled themselves as. And as Yasmin said, like, that is more than anything what has truly, I guess for me, been the sort of sorest point and the real sticking point. I don't think that anybody's suggesting that women should be, I mean, of course, women are held to a higher standard, but they are also, these women in particular are holding themselves purportedly to a higher standard by suggesting that, you know, their institutions are intersectional, that they're inclusive. Nobody asked them to, like, nobody sent them to say that. That's how they decided to define themselves as. And then when people are asking them to show essentially the receipts as to, you know, okay, if you are so intersectional, if you are so inclusive, then why are you not paying your staff, which is pretty basic, they are being held to account accordingly, I feel. And I feel that if Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg were claiming that Facebook were intersectional organizations, and I guess they kind of even do, to be honest, with the whole diversity and inclusion bullshit, but if that was at the forefront of their branding, or any horrible conglomerate, then it'd be fair to sort of hold them to that standard of that theory that they're just wearing for the week because it's fashionable. That's just my point on accountability.
That's a great point, Yomi. I wonder, can we really are running out of time now, so I'm sorry, Jan Eldred from the Fawcett Society, if we could bring you in, because presumably this is something that you've been looking at and analysing and unpicking for a very long time.
I'm not from the Fawcett Society.
Oh, sorry.
I made a comment about them because they have been around such a long time. And the puzzle is, to me, that when an organisation has integrity, and has been punching above its weight in this kind of field for so long, that it hasn't had greater impact and that more people don't know about it. But I think we are constantly playing in a masculine dominated hegemony in all aspects of work and of play, and we need a revolution. And I'm quite old and past it, but yeah, I'd be up for a revolution.
I think probably many of us are with you on that. I think here for the revolution, yes. Well, I think we've run out of time, and that's quite a good point to end this conversation on, because it feels like we got somewhere maybe slightly uplifting in the final 12 seconds of this conversation. Thank you all, particularly to Natalie, because, you know, it takes real balls to talk about something that's been happening to you over a number of weeks, and I'm sorry that you've had to experience that, and I think everyone here will wish you all the best in your negotiations and fighting for what you have a right to get. Also, thank you to Jessa and Yomi and Ilana for coming, and to everyone who's spoken. I'm committed, as an editor at Tortoise, I'm really committed to making sure that we continue to investigate this topic, and we have a reporter who's going to be looking at the wing specifically. But to anyone on the call who would like to talk, or who didn't feel comfortable in this forum but would like to email me, I'll put my email in the chat, and I'm really keen to hear from you. You know, that didn't have to be tonight. Thank you all so much. Thank you to all the speakers, and do stay in touch. Bye. We can just wave each other because we can't do anything else.